Hi, I'm Sam. I'm a realtor. I'm licensed in both Florida and Massachusetts with Berkshire Hathaway in both states, Florida Realty in Florida, Commonwealth in Massachusetts. And I'm doing a series to help people understand real estate commissions. The most important thing to understand is there have always been four agreements within the entire real estate transaction to get it to the closing table. And that number might surprise people because really the only agreement that buyers, especially first-time home buyers, understand or know about is the agreement between the buyer and the seller. That there's a contract where the buyer offers an amount, escrow, inspection period, all that, closing costs sometimes get negotiated and that sort of thing. The terms of the loan, because they know they have to sign a contract in order to transfer a property from one person to another, and then a deed is recorded so that the municipality knows who to tax for homeowners, right? So the new one for some states like Florida is the agreement between the buyer's agent and the buyer. In states like Florida, it used to be able to be performed in a tacit agreement, meaning that it was just an understanding or maybe a handshake. It didn't have to be signed. In other states like Massachusetts, it was already something that was implemented where the buyer's agent was signing an agreement with the buyer. So this is why it's confusing, is because when a federal ruling comes across and regulations change, it seems like it's coming across as a one size fits all, and that's not what happens because every state is different, right? So in most brokerages in Massachusetts, this was already happening. In Florida, it's a big surprise. People are a little thrown off by the fact that they have to sign an agreement with their buyer's agent before the buyer's agent can take them out to look at houses, okay? So that's a new implementation. That agreement was always there. Just understand that agreement was always there. When you are using a realtor's time to take you out to see houses and you're asking them questions and you're talking about negotiating and that sort of thing, you're using that realtor's time with the tacit promise and understanding that you are going to use that realtor to then write an offer and get you to the closing table. Okay? So now it has to be signed in every state. The other thing is that there was an agreement prior to you going to look at the house, which is the listing agreement. Now, a lot of people might be surprised to know that in states like Massachusetts, you could have a tacit, it's legal to have a tacit listing agreement, that you don't even legally have to have a written contract signed by both parties in order to list a property. Now, it's not typically used, but it's on the books. And that might be a surprise to some people because for most people that have experience in selling a property, they understand that they have to sign an agreement with a listing agent in order to list a property. Okay, but I'm just pointing out that every state is different and some of these agreements were tacit before and now they have to be signed. Now, baked into that listing agreement was an agreement with the seller and the listing agent's brokerage that they would agree to pay a commission to the listing agent. And then the listing agent was also negotiating the commission for the buyer's agent because the seller typically would pay the listing agent's brokerage. And then the listing agent's brokerage would then share that commission with the buyer's agent's brokerage. So fourth agreement, and this is the one that I guarantee nobody understands or knew about. And it was baked into the listing agreement, is that the listing agent's brokerage agrees to share the commission with the buyer's agent brokerage if the seller is paying. And so that's another agreement that has to be signed with the listing agent's brokerage and the buyer's agent's brokerage when they come to terms. So there's your four agreements. They've always existed. Some of them were baked into the listing agreement, some of them were tacit, but now all four of them are parsed out and spelled out, and they have to be agreed upon and signed ahead of time before anything can transpire. I hope that wasn't too confusing. Please ask questions if it was, or if you need clarification. I will make spin-off videos from each one of these videos as I'm explaining the changes, and there's more to come. Hi, happy Friday. It's Sam. I'm a realtor. I'm licensed in Massachusetts and Florida. I'm doing a series of videos to help people understand all the agreements that are involved in a real estate transaction and how the SCOTUS decision has changed the landscape of real estate for realtors and buyers and listers and everyone that's involved. So the first video that I did, this is the second in my series, was about all those agreements that have always existed. The sales contract, the buyer brokerage agreement, the listing agreement, and the broker to broker agreement. All those agreements always existed. It's just now they're parsed out and they have to be signed by each party. The one that I'd like to talk about today, we're going to skip over the sales contract. That was the first one that everybody knows about, but we're going to go straight to the buyer brokerage agreement because that's the one that is confusing, because states like Florida, you didn't have to sign an agreement with your buyer's agent for them to take you out and show you properties. In Massachusetts, the buyers were signing brokerage agreements with their buyer's agents. And so some states it's not affecting really much at all, but states like Florida, it's affecting people a lot, and realtors are not used to it and buyers are not used to it. And so we're going to go over the terms that are in the buyer brokerage agreement. Buyer brokerage agreement is with the brokerage. That's why it's called a buyer brokerage agreement. It's not with the individual realtor. It's with the brokerage. So if, God forbid, something were to happen to me when I'm taking my buyer out, I drive home, I get in a car crash, I'm in the hospital, or then that agreement carries on and the broker will assign another agent to that buyer if something happens. The next thing is the amount of time that the buyer's agent and the buyer are agreeing to look for a property to get it under contract. Typically, it could be anywhere from like 3 to 6 months. It depends. Everything's negotiable, and you agree together as to what amount of time you want to be working together. And then the next thing is the area. So a buyer might say, oh, I only want to be in this specific neighborhood. This is definitely the only, but buyers really don't understand what they want until they see it, is the type of property. And this is to prevent, I had buyers who told me they wanted a condo. So we were looking at condos. Then they said, no, we're not going to do a condo. We're going to do a single family home. And I go, okay, we'll look for single family homes now. Then they were like, oh, now we're looking at new construction. And then they were like, now we're just looking at vacant land now. And they were all over the place. Right. And so there's another thing, is that just because your buyer says, oh, this is exactly the type of property that I want, sometimes you might want to include more. Is the duties of the agent and the buyer to each other, and they have to be honest and fair. The buyer has to provide pre-approval so the agent knows how much they can afford, and that's also in the agreement as well. It's like, we're not looking at properties, if you're only pre-approved to 350, I can't take you to see a property that's $1 million listed. The compensation is that the buyer agrees to pay the buyer's agent their commission if the seller is not offering it. And within the agreement, it states that a buyer is either willing to look at properties where the seller is not offering a compensation for the buyer's agent, so that they know ahead of time of the probability of having to pony up that extra 3% for their agent. They can say, I don't want to look at any properties where the seller is not offering, so that they know that they won't have to provide that compensation for their buyer's agent. But they still might have to provide some. For example, I'm going out with my buyer. She signed the buyer brokerage agreement for 3% for mine. That's how much she's agreeing that I should get compensation. We looked at properties where the seller was only offering 2.5% to pay my commission, meaning she would have to pay the other 0.5%. But we also looked at properties where the seller was offering 3.5%. So then that extra 0.5%, she's only agreed that I would earn 3%. That extra 0.5%, then we get to talk about. And if she wants to, and it plays hardball and says, no, we agreed 3%, you're not getting that, then the buyer could actually end up getting that 0.5% towards their transaction. Or we could split it, something like that. So it It depends. There's a lot of variables. It's just everything is very much more at the forefront where we talk about these things. All of these things were negotiable before, but it's very much at the forefront now because the buyer agrees to what the buyer's agent's commission is before we even go look at properties. And then that can fluctuate up and down depending on how much the seller is offering. I hope that was not too confusing. If you have any questions or comments, please share them. Share this video. So just really quick to recap the buyer brokerage agreement for all you new buyers out there or all you buyers who are getting used to this idea in the states like Florida where signing a buyer brokerage agreement is new. The agreement is with the brokerage, like Berkshire Hathaway, not Samantha Andrews-Jarvis. It's with Berkshire Hathaway. It's for the amount of time you want to work with that brokerage to look for a property. It's for the specific areas. It's for the type of property, for the responsibilities of both parties, for the agreed upon list price based on the pre-approval, and the agreed upon commission that the buyer and the buyer's agents agree that the buyer agent will receive at the closing. Hope this helps. Okay, bye. Hi, happy Friday. It's Sam. I'm a realtor. I'm licensed in both Florida and Massachusetts. Berkshire Hathaway Home Services in both states, Florida Realty in Florida, Commonwealth in Massachusetts, and I'm making a series of videos to help realtors and consumers alike understand the changes that have come down as a result of the SCOTUS decision recently about real estate commissions and how it's changed the transaction. And what I'd like to talk about today is open houses, because open houses have become a great way to navigate the changes. And the reason why is that you don't have to have anything signed. You don't have to have a buyer brokerage agreement signed with any realtor to go to an open house. So you can go to any open house. Now, while you're there, if you ask certain type of questions, you might be asked to sign a buyer brokerage agreement if you want the answers to those questions. So that's where that easily navigating this new landscape would end. If you start asking questions about, like, what would my payments be at the going interest rate, at the list price, that's a buyer-oriented question, and the listing agent or whoever is sitting in that open house is not going to be able to answer those questions unless you sign a buyer brokerage agreement. Now, on the agent side, if someone starts asking you questions like that, instead of saying, I can't answer them, what you could do instead is say, if you signed a buyer brokerage agreement with me for just one day, and we just limited it today so that if you were going to make an offer on this house today, you would have to go through me and use me as your buyer's agent, or use my brokerage if you're in a state that doesn't allow the dual agency. Some states do, like Florida. Some states don't, like Massachusetts. So you could say, if you wanted to use me or someone in my brokerage to make the offer, then you could sign a buyer brokerage agreement just for one day, and then I could answer all of your questions, and it would only be limited to today. And then after the day is done, you're free to, it expires, and you're free to go not sign a buyer's brokerage agreement or sign one with another agent, whatever you need to do. So open houses have become much more crucial and a good tool for both listing agents and for potential buyers who are looking to buy in the neighborhood. Hopefully that helps.